Wake up, Wilson. Wake up, Wilson. One evening, Wilson and Coco were chasing each other around the park. "Can't catch me," shouted Wilson, laughing. "Here I come." "Slow, coach," Coco replied, zooming after him. "You need an early night, Wilson. You have your first mail run tomorrow." V said it was time for the trains to go to bed, but Wilson wanted to have fun with Coco. He had forgotten all about the mail run. At the roundhouse, Coco and Wilson dared each other to stay awake. They lasted as long as they could. Then Wilson heard Coco snoring. "Wah! I won," whispered Wilson, before falling asleep too. In the morning, Wilson chugged sleepily towards the rolling stockyard and coupled up to a mail car. Yawn. "You've practiced with this mail car lots of times before," said Dunbar, and reminded him what to do. Yawn. By the time Wilson reached the second station stop, he felt really sleepy. Oil Can Eddie spotted Wilson from the track above. "Watch out, Wilson, your door's open, mate," he said. Yawning, Wilson thanked Eddie and drove into the tunnel. Wilson felt even sleepier inside the tunnel. It was dark and cosy, just like the roundhouse. He pulled over to the side of the track and fell asleep. Meanwhile, V was looking for Wilson. He was supposed to be at the sorting office by noon. "Wilson, where are you?" Wilson woke up and rolled out of the tunnel. "I'm here, V. Don't worry, I'll catch up," he promised, racing off. Back at the depot, Coco overheard Dunbar and V talking about Wilson. They were worried he wouldn't make it to the sorting office on time. "Oh no, Wilson's tired because I kept him up so late," thought Coco. She raced off to see if she could help her sleepy friend. Choo-choo! Honk, honk. Coco soon found Wilson, who was asleep again on the side of the track. "Wake up, Wilson," cried Coco, sounding her horn. Wilson woke up and gasped. "Oh no, I've got to shift my gears." At last, Wilson reached the sorting office at the Chungington Post, but the rest of the mail had already been taken to the branch station. The Chungington Post has never been late before. Wilson felt terrible. It was all his fault. Suddenly, he had an idea. He could sort the mail now and take it to all the branch stations himself. It would take a long time, but the postmistress agreed to give it a try. The mail was sorted into sacks before being loaded into Wilson's car. Wilson dropped off a sack at each station. At last, Wilson chugged into the depot. He'd done it. He had delivered all the Chungington mail. "I'm sorry I let you all down. It won't happen again," Wilson promised. And it didn't. That night, Wilson had lots of sleep, and the next morning he did the mail run on time. Spot goes on holiday. Spot goes on holiday. "Dad and I are taking you to the beach, Spot." "Yippee!" Spot wants to buy something. "Can I have a sailor's hat?" "You really spoil him, Sam." "Thanks, Dad." "Catch the ball, Spot." "Watch it." Sam is having a nap. "What are you making, Spot?" Sandcastles. Where's Dad? Here I am. This is fun, Spot. Dad, I've caught a fish. Almost. Puppy overboard. I'm all right. Spot, that's not your towel. Let go. What has Spot found now? A new friend. Come on, Spot. You can play with your new friend tomorrow. Good. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? A waterhole. A wet, reedy waterhole. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We'll have to go through it. Splish, splash, splish, splash. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? Sand. Hot, trickly sand. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We'll have to go through it. Hot, hot, very hot. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? Rocks! Red, rickety rocks! We can't go over them. We can't go under them. We'll have to go through them. Click, clackety, click, clackety. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? Scrub! Spiky brown scrub! We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We'll have to go through it. Crunch, scurry, crunch, scurry. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? A swamp. A dark, spooky swamp. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We'll have to go through it. Sneaky, sneak, sneaky, sneak. We're going on a croc hunt. We're going to find a big one. I'm not afraid. We're as brave can be. Watch out! What is it? Over there. Over where? 2 round, glowing eyes. Great big jagged scales. Sharp, pointy teeth. Ah, it's a crocodile! Everybody run, back through the swamp. Sneaky, sneak, sneaky, sneak. Hurry through the scrub, crunch, scurry, over the rocks. Clickety, clackety, clickety, clackety. Race through the sand, hot, hot, very hot. Swim across the waterhole, splish, splash, splish, splash. Phew, we're safe. Now what will we play? My daddy. My name is Pepper, and this book is all about my daddy. He's the best daddy in the whole wide world, and the funniest. My daddy has an extremely serious job, but I don't think he's very serious at all. My daddy reads about very important matters, but I know that bedtime stories are his favourite. My daddy loves taking us on trips to the seaside, especially when I bury him in the sand. My daddy is always extremely helpful and very brave, but sometimes I think he's a teeny tiny bit clumsy. My daddy is very good at planning DIY jobs, but he doesn't seem to be that good at doing them. My daddy says he likes to keep in shape all the time, but his favourite exercise is lifting the remote control. My daddy says he loves his little red car so very, very much, but I know he loves us more than anything in the whole wide world. Grandparents are great. Carl and Kathy opened their grandparents' door. They are ready for games and treats, music and more. While Grandma and Kathy are playing cards, Carl and Grandpa work in the yard. With blankets they build a tent just right, so it is so dark inside it feels like night. When their time together comes to an end, Carl asks, "When can we come back again?" Shall we do that again? Shall we do that again? Mrs. Brown Mouse and Little Brown Mouse were walking in the woods. Mrs. Brown Mouse hid behind a tree and popped out with a loud boo. Little Brown Mouse jumped and laughed and laughed. "Shall we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. Not now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, "because right now it's time to turn around and go back." So they turned around to go back, and just when Mrs. Brown Mouse wasn't expecting it, Little Brown Mouse hid amongst the flowers and popped out with a loud boo. Mrs. Brown Mouse jumped and Little Brown Mouse laughed and laughed. "Shall we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. Not now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, putting Little Brown Mouse high on her shoulders, "because right now it's time to get home for supper." So off they went home for supper, and while Mrs. Brown Mouse cooked, Little Brown Mouse watched, and just when Mrs. Brown Mouse wasn't expecting it, Little Brown Mouse crept across the room and hid behind the door. And jumped out with a loud "Bah!" And Mrs. Brown Mouse waved her wooden spoon and went "Bah!" straight back, which sent Little Mouse running under the table, laughing and laughing. "Shall we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. "Not right now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, "because right now it's time to eat." So they sat down to eat. With Little Brown Mouse played with her food, and Mrs. Brown Mouse ate her food. And just as she was taking a rather large mouthful, Little Brown Mouse slid down behind her chair and popped out with a loud "Mwah!" Mrs. Brown Mouse jumped and ran after her, crying, "What's a little ghost doing in my kitchen?" And Little Brown Mouse laughed and laughed. "Shall we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. "Not right now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, "because right now it's time for your bath." So hand in hand, Mrs. Brown Mouse and Little Brown Mouse went upstairs. And Mrs. Brown Mouse prepared Little Brown Mouse's bath. And Mrs. Brown Mouse lathered up the sponge and got down to the washing, and just when she wasn't expecting it, splash! Little Brown Mouse made a big splash and soaked her. Mrs. Brown Mouse shrieked and splashed her back, and Little Brown Mouse laughed and laughed. "Shall we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. Not now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, "because right now it's time for your bed." So Mrs. Brown Mouse dried little brown mouse dry and powdered her and took hold of her toes and tickled her under one and tickled her under two and tickled her under three and tickled her under four and tickled her all the way, wiggle, 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 from her tubby little toes to her chubby little chin. And little brown mouse laughed and laughed and laughed. "Can we do that again?" she laughed and laughed. "Please." "Not now," said Mrs. Brown Mouse, "because right now it's time for your bedtime story." So little brown mouse snuggled down under the duvet, and after all the excitement, Mrs. Brown Mouse read her a quiet bedtime story. And when it was finished, little brown mouse gave Mrs. Brown Mouse a big hug, and as Mrs. Brown Mouse was giving her a big hug back, up the stairs crept Mr. Brown Mouse. "Boo!" cried little brown mouse. "Boo!" laughed Mr. Brown Mouse. "Shall we do that again?" he laughed and laughed. "Oh no, not now," said little brown mouse, "because now it's time for another hug."